Hello, everyone, and welcome into Coach Craig's Sports. This is the MLB DFS Core Pick video, Core Pick live stream for today, Tuesday, September 5th. It is going to be a 10-game main slate in total. If you're joining me for the very first time, this is kind of how I approach this video. Go over a recap of yesterday's picks, see how they ultimately end up turning out. Go over to RotoWire, talk about any potential weather spots for the games for today on the main slate, and then we'll go over to FanDuel, talk about my core 5 picks. It's going to be one pitcher, 4 hitters. It's going to be a combination based on past performances and their respective matchups, plus their recent performances as well. And then last but not least, we'll get over to my cheat sheet, talk about the bottom half with my top GPP teams to stack for today overall. That cheat sheet is 100% free. It's up on Facebook. It's up on Twitter. It's up on the YouTube community tab. So definitely be sure to check it out as you're building out your lineups. If you're interested in more in-depth notes, Monday through Friday, notable hitter matchups, pitchers, whether or not I would consider them in play, an avoid, or a risky play in general, and then some additional stacks on some of the larger slates. Be sure to check that out over on the Patreon at patreon.com/CoachCraigSport. But without further ado, we'll get started with a recap of yesterday's picks. So we're going to start off with the pitcher position. We had Jose Berrios at $10,100. Ultimately ended up getting a 37 points to give him a hit. We were looking for at least 36 out of him. He ultimately ended up being that 6th overall pitcher on yesterday's slate. So there was 5 guys that were better than him. But, there's only like probably 2 that were clear cut above him at that point in time. And then initially we had Yandy Diaz in our core picks. He did not ultimately start yesterday. We pivoted over to Jose Altuve, who had a monster day at $4,000, 46.6 points. He was a hit in the top overall second baseman on yesterday's slate. So a very good hit right there. And then at shortstop, we went with JP Crawford at $3,100. Like that Seattle matchup quite a bit. Got to 9.5 points, ultimately did give him a hit, and he was the 4th overall shortstop on yesterday's slate. And then his teammate in the outfield, Julio Rodriguez, at $4,300, hit a home run yesterday, got to 18.7 points, so he was a hit, and ended up being the 8th overall outfielder on yesterday's slate. So most of the core was pretty good yesterday. The one lone miss yesterday was Austin Slater at $2,200, our kind of pay down dart throw option. Got to 0 points. He was a mess and 0 for 3 on the day. And Justin Steele pitched really well against the Giants team yesterday. So kind of unfortunate there for Slater and company. But, if he had some other good plays, some solid plays, a lot of home runs yesterday, he had a good chance of cashing at the same time yesterday. Pretty high scoring day, though. But with that being said, we're going to get off this screen. We'll get over to RotoWire and talk about that weather report for today. So let me get that brought up. There's only 2 games that we're really looking at in terms of weather-wise, and both have a really good chance of still going off, probably not getting delayed or anything else like that. So in Kansas City, we have the White Sox and the Royals, 13% chance of rain there. Quite warm down there at 94 degrees. Wind blowing out 15 miles an hour. Could be a good spot to hit some home runs today, even though, both these pitchers have decent history versus their respective opponents. But at the same time, both of them have been very hit or miss this season. And then over in Chicago, we have the Cubs and the Giants. 14% chance of rain there. Looks like the wind's blowing out there too as well. So maybe another game to target. Even though Kyle Hendricks does have some pretty good history versus the Giants in the past, maybe lean more on the Cubs hitters' sides. But that's kind of what we have in terms of weather at this point in time. If anything does majorly change throughout the day, we'll leave it as an update down in the comments. Also, be sure to look out for the starting lineups as they do get announced throughout the afternoon and evening down there as well, especially as you're building out your lineups as we get closer to lock. But with that being said, we're going to stop sharing this screen. We'll get over to FanDuel and talk about those core 5 picks for today. And once again, I do apologize that my camera is still not working at this point in time. I have to probably uninstall, reinstall it, and update a couple drivers and stuff like that. A little bit of stuff that I haven't quite had time for in recent days. But in terms of the core picks that we do have for today, we're going to start off at the pitcher position with Garrett Cole. He's $11,500, the most expensive pitcher on tonight's slate. He's got some pretty decent history versus the Detroit Tigers in the past. 43 points versus them this year. Last year was 58 and 8 points against them. So there was one bad start in there. But for the most part, he's been really solid once again this year, averaging about 38 fantasy points per game. ERA is just under 3, 12 wins on the season. If you look at kind of what he's done recently, there was the one mediocre start versus Boston, but that's a team that he kind of is hit or miss versus anyways. A little bit worse start versus the White Sox, but otherwise been pretty consistent throughout the season. So don't really have too many worries there. Probably going to be pretty popular today, but there are some pretty good pitching options today, so definitely feel free to mix and match once again. And then we move down to first base. We're going with Pete Alonso here at $3,900, averaging just over 12 fantasy points per game. Going against Patrick Corbin today. Very good matchup for him, just, based on his past history. I believe it's 14. I want to say 14 for 43 with 5 home runs versus him. I did leave my notebook in the other room, so doing a lot of that based off of memory. If there is anything that I'm completely wrong about, I will update it down in the comments. But you look at what Pete Alonso's done recently, we got a 4-game hitting streak here. He hit 2 home runs yesterday. Probably going to be pretty popular today going against Patrick Corbin. Corbin's been, one of the lesser pitchers over the past 2-3 seasons at this point in time. Do like the Mets quite a bit today, led by Pete Alonso, who is obviously on the thumbnail for today. Then we're going to keep moving down. So at second base, we're going with Ketel Marte here at $3,400. Some really good history in the past versus Kyle Freeland. I believe it's 13 for 30 with 3 home runs versus him. I know the 3 home runs for sure. We got $3,400, 11 fantasy points per game, 274 average, 21 home runs, 70 RBIs. I think we talked about him a little bit before. A guy when he was a little bit younger was running some. Doesn't really do that at this point in time due to some of those soft tissue injuries that he's had over the years. But if you look at what he's done in recent games, we got a modest 3-game hitting streak here. There was an offer there. And then before that, a 4-game hitting streak. So 7 out of the last 8 games, he's got at least 1 hit. So some pretty solid, safe floor there at the same time. Hitting towards the top of the lineup for the Arizona Diamondbacks today. Got some pretty good history versus Kyle Freeland in the past. And then we're going to keep moving over. So we got Evan Longoria here. He's $2,100, kind of our dart throw pay down option for today. So he's got 3 home runs in his career versus Kyle Freeland. I believe it's 12 for 29. 12 for 29 in his career versus him. 232 average, 11 home runs, 25 RBS. Nothing to really write home about, but guy that's been going against left-handed pitching more so for this team this year. And, he's had a little bit of power in those matchups as well. So not too worried about it. Obviously, a little bit older player and everything else like that. A little bit hit or miss as of late, even being a part-time player like that and everything. But still like the upside that he can present at a really cheap price tag. Obviously, we got to make sure that he's in the lineup. If he's not, then obviously this will get pivoted over to somebody else. I'll leave a pin comment down below to talk about who that would be in that situation. But really do like him as a potential pay down option. If he hits a home run today, definitely going to pay off in a big, big way at that price tag. Then we're going to move down to our last player, which is Jeff McNeil, who you could play at second base. You could play at outfield, but we already have Ketel Marte at second base. I always like sticking at least one outfielder in the core picks, depending on the day, but do like Jeff McNeil here. Some pretty good history in his career versus Patrick Corbin. 10 for 35, so a 286 batting average versus Patrick Corbin in his career. A little bit lesser versus him as of late, which, it's a lefty on lefty matchup, so it's a little bit tougher. Maybe he gets the spot off today just in general in that matchup, but still do like him quite a bit. 270 average, 7 home runs, 49 RBIs, just over 8 fantasy points per game at $2,900. If you look at what he's done recently, it's been pretty good. This batting average was a little bit lower until recently. So we have a 5-game hitting streak with 3 multi-hit games during that time span. He did ultimately hit a home run yesterday as well. So do like the upside that's there overall for Jeff McNeil and this Mets lineup today. But with that being said, if you ultimately go with the 5 players that I do have listed here, you have $11,200, $2,800 per player. So we're going to have to find a couple of value options today, which there are some pretty good ones out there. Whether it's somebody on the Mets, Ronnie Mauricio, who just got called up, played 3 games. He's $2,500. A couple different options out there. Be sure to check out on the cheat sheet for that overall. And then with that being said, we'll get over to the cheat sheet, talk about the top GPP teams to stack for today overall. So let me get that brought up here real quick as we're talking through it. Looks like it's loading quite a bit, so I do apologize for that as we're talking through everything. But in terms of the top GPP teams that I do have to stack for today, we have the Toronto Blue Jays once again. Same matchup as yesterday versus Ken Waldichuk. He had a very poor start versus them earlier this season. Not a long list of history there. Luis Medina ultimately ended up starting for the A's yesterday. So going back to the Blue Jays once again, then we have the Mets going against Patrick Corbin. They've had really good history versus him in the past, whether it is Pete Alonso, Jeff McNeil, Francisco Lindor, probably somebody else that I'm forgetting at this point in time, but a lot of them do have really good history versus him in the past. And like I said, Patrick Corbin, one of the lesser pitchers in all of baseball over the past 2-3 seasons. And then we have the Atlanta Braves going against Miles Mikolas. They have some pretty decent history versus him, mainly like Marcell Ozuna, Eddie Rosario, and Austin Riley. Matt Olson's up there as well. He didn't fit into my cheat sheet ultimately because Pete Alonso was in that pay up spot. So definitely a couple different options we can consider there. And then last but not least, we have the Arizona Diamondbacks going against Kyle Freeland, where they do have really good history versus him, whether it is Kettle Marte, Christian Walker, Tommy Pham, Evan Longoria, probably somebody else that I'm forgetting at this point in time, but 4 or 5 guys that do have really good history versus him in the past. So that's kind of where I'd be trying to build around these stacks just in general. Should be a pretty interesting day. Maybe one that you want to get a little bit creative. If you want to consider that Cubs lineup, not a long list of history there versus Ryan Walker or Sean Mejia or Shamanaya, who it should be today for them. Obviously, it sounds like that win should be blown out in that game. So that's one that we could consider as well. And then the Yankees versus Alex Fadio, there is just no history there. So he's one that did ultimately end up in my Patreon list. So a couple free ones there for you guys today. Definitely appreciate everyone out there supporting, whether you're joining for the first time or you've been watching for a while. But with that being said, that's kind of what I do have in terms of MLB DFS core picks for today, in terms of the top stacks, the recap, and the weather report. As always, if you have any questions related to MLB DFS, be sure to let me know down in the comments and I'll get back to you as quickly as possible. Also, be sure to let me know your favorite play on tonight's slate, whether it is someone from my core 5 picks, whether it's someone from my top GPP stacks, or whether it's a completely different player who I didn't mention. Definitely interested in who that is for you today. And then, as always, if there's any major updates weather-wise, I'll list them down in the comments below, as well as those starting lineups. So definitely make sure you're checking up as we do get closer to lock. But with that being said, that's all that I truly have at this point in time. If you're joining me for the very first time, first of all, definitely do appreciate it. Second of all, be sure to subscribe. Excuse me. Second of all, be sure to subscribe. Definitely would appreciate it. Helps to build the community that we're trying to build here at Coach Craig Sports, which is one that's truly for you, the viewers, helping you with your DFS. Right now, we got MLB DFS Monday through Friday. We got CFL DFS a video going up once a week as well. And then NFL regular season starts this week. So we'll be doing a little bit of content for that for NFL DFS for week number 1 as well. But with that being said, that's all that I truly have at this point in time. Definitely do appreciate each and every one of you tuning in, whether you're watching live or on replay. Definitely means a lot to me. I hope that each and every one of you have a great rest of your day and some pretty good luck in MLB DFS tonight.